Hello, my name is John Piadilla, and I am currently a graduate student at Texas State University in the Management of Technical Education Master's Program. I am right now in AUCAD 5361, Human Systems in the Workplace, and I'm using as my primary textbook Strategic Management and Organizational Dynamics. While in this course, I have learned about systems theory and in specific, complex adaptive systems and complex responsive processes, and feel confident in explaining how these theories can be applied to a movie. In this instance, too big to fail. I'd like to go ahead and cite the sources that I will be using throughout the presentation. The first is the movie itself, released as a television movie on the HBO network in 2011. My second citation is the textbook I had referenced earlier, Strategic Management and Organizational Dynamics by Robert D. Stacy and Chris Miles, published in 2016. In my short video, I'm going to go ahead and give you a brief summary of the movie and the applications of CAS and CRP, and then I'll give you my conclusion and review the structure, presentation, and visual appeal. According to HBO, which produced this movie, Too Big to Fail is based on the best-selling book by Andrew Ross Sorkin, Too Big to Fail, which offers an intimate look at the epical financial crisis of 2008 and the powerful men and women who decided the fate of the world's economy in a matter of a few weeks. Centering on Treasury Secretary Henry Paulson, the film goes behind closed doors to examine the symbiotic relationship between Wall Street and Washington, D.C. The slide in front of you gives a great little snapshot on what the politicians and bankers were trying to resolve before the entire global financial system crashed. What is considered a banking crisis, the movie goes on to shape and form the issue as a mortgage crisis. This will be central to the movie's theme as the political and financial agents are brought together through this force. In the end, through conflict and compromise, the crisis is averted both in the movie and in the real world. Two of the important agents within this movie are Hank Paulson, Secretary of Treasury, and Ben Bernanke, Federal Reserve Chairman. Tim Geithner, the head of the New York Federal Reserve, also plays a key role within the background of the movie. There are also brief appearances of other noticeable politicians such as Nancy Pelosi and John McCain. The second group in which the movie keys on is the bankers. This group in particular is playing out CAS and CRP depending on your perspective with their interactions in the movie. If you don't know the people, you will know the banking organizations that they represent as CEOs or directors. This includes the commercial banks such as JP Chase, Citigroup, Bank of America, and Wells Fargo, and the investment banks such as Goldman Sachs, Lehman Brothers, and Morgan Stanley, which according to the movie pretty much created the crisis itself. So what is complex adaptive system theory for perspective? According to Stacy and Moles, complex adaptive systems differ from dominant discourse theory of systems thinking in that it focuses attention at a lower level of description, namely the micro level of the individual agents that form the system. The models demonstrate how local, that is self-organizing, interaction yields emergent order for the whole system and also, in certain conditions, evolution in the form of emergent novelty theory. In other words, new stuff. A CAS system consists of a large number or a large population of entities. These agents interact and self-organize and adapt to each other, thus producing a system and a system-wide pattern. Examples of CAS: a flock of birds, ecological system, and even the human brain. If you look at the slide in front of you, you can tell that it looks like those people have organized to throw the banker off, well, looks like a mountain. CAS is studied through digital code to be analogous to biological systems via computer simulations. Viewed at the micro level, self-organization and emergence can produce structural novelty that is spontaneous, that changes the system at the fundamental level, and orderly behavior emerges from the simple rules. The external designer is not considered in its development. We also have to consider that CAS is extensively used by, as Stacey and Moles state, in the social sciences such as sociology, economics, and politics in order to explain population-wide social phenomena. Too Big to Fail consists of two major factions that interplay within the movie. The populations which represent the government and the bankers which represent the private financial sector in the United States. They all break down to individual agents within their respective organizations. One of the self-organizations is that the bankers, both through suggestion and out of personal intent, begin to compromise with each other in order to resolve the financial situation, accepting the inevitable that if they do not work with the government, all their banks are at existential risk. This occurs when Jamie Dimon, CEO of JP Chase, volunteers $1 billion to contribute to help keep some of the private investment banks open and asking other bankers at the table to contribute as well. According to the movie, they all added monies. From that point on, the bankers took on a form of self-organization and began to figure out who was going to take on what financial responsibility for their institution. The container in this movie is U.S. finance laws. While Paulson has some latitude in being constructive, almost any solution the two factions come up with would have to be voted on by Congress. The constraint is the U.S. government itself. A coherent behavior from the factions and individuals develops in that there is an air of an inevitable collapse of the system if nothing was done. On the political side, Paulson, Bernanke, and Geithner are apocalyptic in both in views and behaviors because they do believe in the movie that it's the end of the financial world that they know. A great example of emergence in Too Big to Fail is that banks became bigger as a structural change in the U.S. financial system. This was an unanticipated consequence of the self-organization within the movie and outlines a key aspect of CAS. A system will evolve out of the interplay of individual agents. What is CRP? CRP is a systems theory that prioritizes the individual within an organization and how that individual interacts with other members of that organization. It's through this process that patterns and organizations are created and how they evolve. It runs counter to the dominant discourse of systems thinking in that there is no objective observer who can create or change an organization. It arises out of the interaction of its members. In complex responsive processes, we need to consider organizations as social objects and mental constructs that are abstracted by its members who make up that organization. When we do this, we can derive two conclusions. An organization is not a living thing, and secondly, the relationship between member and organization is paradoxical. The members shape the individual, and in return, the organization shapes its members. CRP calls for a change in organizational leadership theory by implying that once leaders understand that they are not independent designers of the organization, but are more as facilitators of conversation concerning organizational strategy, then the leader will be able to make better decisions. CRP's focus on local happenings and local interactions between individuals. That is to say, that everyday conversations intense as they interact with others. CRP is played out by both bankers and politicians in Too Big to Fail. These local conversations, often in the form of shadow conversations, which help to form an emergent answer. The agents are not handed a how-to book to deal with the crisis. They have to figure out how to save the financial world by interacting to common intent, which in the world of complex responsive processes is how all decisions are made. As far as organizational knowledge being shared, all the actors are blunt when interacting with the other actors. The knowledge does flow in true CRP fashion back and forth and fluidly. Arguably, this is why they were able to find a solution within 2 weeks from this perspective. There's a scene in which Dick Volt, the CEO of Lehman Brothers, wonders why nobody is calling him to either help him out or at least buy Lehman Brothers. This occurs spontaneously with no overt let's leave Dick Volt out in the cold by the other CEOs. However, Volt's paranoia of being excluded leads him to bad decision making in the end. Overall, it's the political and financial systems that allow for a change process. I say they are near the edge of chaos. Both systems facilitate and inhibit at the same time. From an individual perspective, it was Hank Paulson who was a facilitator in the movie in the sense of CRP. He dealt with the intermediary as an intermediary between the Wall Street and Washington, D.C. In his role as Treasury Secretary, he evolved from his position as a successful investment banker at Goldman Sachs to the role of having to grease the proverbial wheels. In Paulson's case, because he was a linchpin, his situation is a perfect case of study on what is necessary to lead a successful organization, however small it may be. In the context of the movie, just over a couple of dozen people that he had to influence, because he certainly did not have control as would be thought of in the dominant discourse. To me, Too Big to Fail did really chronicle the financial abyss that was going to befall the global economy back in 2008, and it's a great movie. All the actors did well. William Hurt as Hank Paulson and Paul Giamatti as Ben Bernanke were exceptional. There's a paradox in the movie from a CRP perspective. Would there have been a financial meltdown if the bankers had not been doing what they had been doing with subprime mortgages? Probably not, in my opinion. However, at least based on the movie, they didn't particularly care where the blame was going, as long as their banks were profitable. I'd like to thank you for viewing my presentation, and hopefully it has provided some insight on CRP, CAS, and Too Big to Fail. If you haven't seen the movie yet, it is probably the best financially based movie you'll ever see. I highly recommend it. I thank you for your time. Goodbye.